Facts Part 1. In 1945, Lloyd Olson beheaded one of his chickens, but it didn't die. It went on living for 18 more months. There's a parasite called the guinea worm that can enter your body through drinking infected water, but you won't notice anything until about a year later, when it breaks through your skin to release larvae, and at that point the worm is a meter long. Judith Barcy, the girl who voiced Ducky in The Land Before Time, was killed in 1988 when she was just 10 years old, along with her mother, by her father in a double murder-suicide.
Okay, fun fact, did you guys know that there's this thing called revenge bedtime procrastination, where people will refuse to sleep because they don't have much control over their daytime life, so they will sleep very late at night even if they're super tired, because they just don't want that free time to end at night and they don't want tomorrow to start.
Warning, this is why you should not touch an old house. A woman recently bought an old house in a very remote area. She wanted to renovate the home, and very quickly she began tearing down the kitchen and ripping all the old wallpaper off. She claimed the wallpaper was extremely satisfying to rip off, like scabs of a sunburn. Very quickly she noticed names and dates in places she was removing the wallpaper. One night she was curious and spent hours googling one of the names. She discovered they were missing people, and the dates they went missing matched what was written on the wall. She called the police, and when they arrived they said, "Yep, it's human. What you were removing from the walls was not wallpaper."
I was not ready for the ending to this one. In the early 2010s, two 15-year-old friends were camping at a state forest with their families. One night, the friends decide they want to go explore the woods around their campsite, but they want to see how far they can get without using a flashlight. A little ways into their trip, they start to hear some whispering behind them, and they quickly turn around, pull out their flashlights, and start looking for what was making the sound. After a short search, they don't find anything, and so even though they're a little bit freaked out, they decide to put their flashlights away and carry on into the woods. After a little while, they start to hear the whispering again. So they pull out their flashlights. Now they're determined to find out what the heck is making this sound. They do a very thorough search, they don't find anything, and at this point they're too freaked out and they decide to start heading back. As they start retracing their steps, they see what was making the sound. A woman comes out from behind a tree, crawling towards them, muttering random words. She sees them, stands up, and says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking for my campsite." They're a half mile from the nearest campsite.
This is the main red flag of a toxic friend. They bring out a bad version of you. Whether you feel more gossipy, judgmental, or argumentative, or if you just feel more insecure or drained after hanging out with them. Toxicity rubs off.
Really weird human body facts that I can guarantee you didn't know. This one depends on you a little bit, but the average human body has enough fat in it to make over 7 bars of soap. If you lose your hand and then get it reattached, even if all mobility and feeling comes back, no matter what you do, the skin on that hand will never get wrinkly in water ever again. It just loses that ability. Us women are actually programmed to forget the pain of childbirth a few months after it happens. This is why we continue to have kids. We're like, oh my God, that was traumatic and so painful. I never want to do that again. And our body's like, nah, forget about it.
Ever wonder what would happen if you stopped sleeping? During World War II, the Russians wanted to find a way to keep their soldiers awake longer. So they came up with this awful experiment where they took prisoners of war, put them in a gas chamber, and then exposed them to experimental drugs to see how long they could keep them awake for. Initially, the drugs seemed great. The first 4 days, the subjects were agitated, but were normal. By day 5, they stopped interacting with each other and began acting extremely paranoid. On day 9, one of the subjects screamed for so long that he tore his vocal cord. On day 14, they started eating themselves. When they turned off the gas on day 15, all of the subjects began screaming in pain, begging for them to turn the gas back on. When they didn't, they all fell asleep and died. This is why you should always look under the toilet seat before you sit down. In 2003, over a 5-day period in London, 3 women showed up to hospitals with the same mysterious symptoms. They say they woke up with these horrible bite marks on the backs of their legs, and then while they're at the hospital, they become paralyzed and die. Despite their similar symptoms, the women had nothing in common except that they had recently been to the same pub. Authorities immediately shut it down and do a thorough search inside of the pub, but can't find anything deadly, until one of the detectives goes to use the pub's bathroom. As he's about to sit down, he thinks he sees something moving in the toilet, so he gives it a little kick. Hiding in the toilet was one of the world's largest and most poisonous spiders, the Brazilian wandering spider, and now they needed to catch it.
This is why you should never play hide and seek. A mom decided to play hide and seek with her 2 kids. The mom began counting, ready or not, here I come. She begins searching the downstairs kitchen because she knows that they hide there every single time. As she's walking to the kitchen, she starts saying, I wonder where they are. She looks under the table and sees they aren't there, which is kind of odd. She knew they were too scared to go into the basement alone, but she decided to check anyway. They weren't there either. She began to panic. The mom then says, Jordan, Casey, come out now, mommy's not playing anymore. There was no answer. Panic really begins to set in. She decides to call 911 and reaches an operator. She tells the operator what's wrong and the operator sends an officer to her house. Once the officer arrives, he says, don't worry, we will find them. As she's sitting in the living room, she hears giggling and laughing and hears a closet door slam upstairs. She sprints upstairs and says, Jordan, Casey, you worried me sick. She opened the closet door and nobody was there. While all of this is going on, she hears the doorbell ring. She runs downstairs and finds the officer holding Jordan and Casey. The officer says, they were hiding in the shed out back. Then Jordan looks at mommy and says, why were you telling us to stay in the shed?
Did you know that gummy bears actually have a really dark history?
So gummy bears were invented in the early 1900s, and they were originally called dancing bears.
Now, in Europe following World War I, dancing bears were quite the attraction.
And people didn't see anything wrong with this, which I find crazy.
The bears would often be chained, made to wear silly clothing, and usually their teeth would have been completely removed so that they were considered safe for the public.
These bears were a very popular attraction at fairs and carnivals in most European cities, and this is literally what gummy bears were based off of. I had no idea they had such a dark history, and obviously later on they changed it from dancing bears to gummy bears, which is a lot better, and they're definitely not associated with that anymore, but it's definitely sad to know the history.
You know that back in the day they used to use spider webs as band-aids?
I had no idea this was actually a thing, and it definitely blew my mind when I found out.
In ancient Greece and Rome, doctors used spider webs as bandages for their patients. Spider webs have natural antiseptic and antifungal properties,
which actually helps with cleaning and preventing an infection.
It was also said that spider webs are rich in vitamin K, which helps clot blood and close wounds.
Could you imagine having like a cut on your leg and the doctor's like, here, put a spider web on it?
I love how confident this guy was. In 1731, the King of Sweden was given an incredible gift. His very own lion, who he loved and totally spoiled. Unfortunately, it died young. After a couple of sad years, the king finally decides that he wants to memorialize the lion, so he sends its pelt and the bones to a world-renowned taxidermist. Now, unfortunately, the taxidermist that he sent it to had never actually seen a lion before, and it's 1731, so he can't just Google it. But he doesn't want to let the king down or jeopardize his reputation, so he's like, yeah, send me its bones and pelt. I'll whip you up a lion.
Back in the day, they used to use spider webs as band-aids.
I had no idea this was actually a thing, and it definitely blew my mind when I found out. In ancient Greece and Rome, doctors used spider webs as bandages for their patients. Spider webs have natural antiseptic and antifungal properties, which actually helps with cleaning and preventing an infection. It was also said that spider webs are rich in vitamin K, which helps clot blood and close wounds. Could you imagine having like a cut on your leg and the doctor's like, here, put a spider web on it? Here is another abandoned Disney park that you're not allowed to go near. This was called River County Water Park, and it first opened back in 1976. The park was filled with excited families and squealing children speeding down water slides. It was complete with rocks and man-made boulders you can jump off of, and in the first year it opened, it had around 4,700 guests per day. In 1982, a 14-year-old boy from North Dakota drowned in the resort after going down Whoopin' Holler water slide. There were no signs saying how deep the water was, which is so dangerous, and lifeguards that worked there came forward and said that dozens of people had to be rescued from that slide each day. And then in 1989, a 13-year-old boy ended up drowning in the park. So since then, the resort has been left to rot, filled with overgrown moss, abandoned rusty water slides covered in vines. No one has stepped foot inside ever since.
This is why you should never explore abandoned ships. In 2014, the US Navy decided to decommission one of its oldest ships, so it brought it into port to be broken down for scrap. Before workers were allowed to actually start breaking it down, the foreman had to go on board and take pictures of every room. So late one night, the foreman spends about an hour walking through this abandoned ship with a flashlight, taking about 100 pictures. When he was done, he emailed the pictures to his boss, who quickly wrote back, "Who's the guy with the axe?" The foreman had no idea what he was talking about, but he noticed the boss had attached one of the pictures that he had just sent him. When he opened it, he nearly fainted. There, in the bowels of the ship, poking his head around a corner, was a faceless man wielding an axe. The foreman had spent over an hour in this hallway and never heard or saw this guy. The Navy searched the ship and never found this guy. They also reviewed security footage of the only entrance, and he never entered or left the ship.
The origin of Thanksgiving actually has a really dark history. Americans generally believe that Thanksgiving comes from the 1621 Harvest Feast. This was a feast involving the Wampanoag tribe and the Pilgrims. But here's the thing, it wasn't until 1863 that this event was declared a national holiday. And you can thank Abraham Lincoln for that. So where does it get dark? Well, you're about to find out. The first declared celebration of Thanksgiving actually happened in 1637. See, the Pilgrims found the body of a white man on a boat. They assumed that they knew who the killers were, and without any evidence that the Pequot village was the cause of this death, they decided to just slaughter all of them because of the assumption that they had something to do with it. 700 men, women, and children lost their lives in cold blood. And the very next day, the governor declared as Thanksgiving because they were thanking God for the victory of wiping out the village. This celebration of Thanksgiving was celebrated for the next 100 years. So even though the Thanksgiving that we celebrate today predates that event, technically the first Thanksgiving was a celebration of mass murder.
Here's the story of Zoe Alexander, the aggressive Pink impersonator from The X Factor. Zoe used to work as a Pink tribute artist, which she obviously mentioned on her application for the show. When she was emailing with producers, because it's this whole long process, they asked her to send in 5 songs she would sing on the show. None of the ones she sent were by Pink. The producer wrote her back and told her that she should sing a Pink song, and it was very clear the only way she would be allowed to come on the show was if she sang a Pink song. When she got there, interviewers kept asking her these really weird specific questions about Pink. They had her get there at 6 a.m., hours before she actually had to be there, and everyone just kept mentioning Pink to her when she wanted to be Zoe. And when the judges told her she shouldn't have sang a Pink song, she realized she'd been set up. When they let her sing a second song, they played the track in the wrong key and turned off the stage speakers so she couldn't hear the music and would sound bad. And what we saw was a complete mental breakdown as she realized the only reason she was ever brought on the show was to become a laughingstock.